Welcome to the Published Author Podcast, where we help entrepreneurs learn how to write a book and leverage it to grow their business and make an impact. I'm your host, Josh Steimle. Welcome to the Published Author Podcast. I'm Josh Steimle. I'm here with Chris Voss, author of Never Split the Difference, one of my favorite books. I've read it twice, and I should probably read it a third time now. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
So today we're going to get Chris talking about the story behind the book and how it got written and how it's helped him to grow his business. But before we dive into that, Chris, for those of the listeners who may not know you out there, can you give us a brief introduction to you and your career before you wrote the book?
Sure. I was an FBI agent, was the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator. Probably between domestic U.S. and international kidnappings, worked about 150 cases worldwide. Just before I left the FBI, I started getting involved with Harvard program on negotiation and law school, sharing ideas on negotiation strategies. We decided we were pretty much doing the same thing. Right after I left the FBI, I was lucky enough to teach negotiation, be on the teaching staff at Harvard Law School. And then right after that, I started teaching business negotiation, these ideas from hostage negotiation for business and personal life. First, I taught it at Georgetown University in their MBA program, then at USC. About 5 years ago, published Never Split the Difference, a book on negotiating for everybody, based on the emotional intelligence of hostage negotiators. The Black Swan method is based on that stuff I learned back then, and we've evolved it. And, I got a business now, and the Black Swan Group teaches and coaches negotiation in business and occasionally personal life.
So what inspired you to become an FBI agent? Was that something you wanted to do when you were a kid, or how did your path lead to that?
I got inspired to go into law enforcement when I was about 16 years old. Originally, I just wanted to be a police officer. Saw a movie, The Super Cops, about two cops in New York City. True story, was really inspired by their creativity and how much good they did, and their independence. I didn't realize it at the time. They were very much mavericks. And I just found that story inspirational. And so then I became a police officer in Kansas City, Missouri. And then my father encouraged me to go federal. He'd paid for a 4-year college degree, and I went and got a job that didn't require a college degree. He wanted me to, continue to improve and aspire and climb the ladder, so to speak. And so he thought federal law enforcement would be that gig, and ended up applying for the FBI. Joined there. Was originally on a SWAT team with the FBI, and then transitioned to hostage negotiation, and loved it, just loved it. And it ended up building my life around it.
So how much is working for the FBI? I mean, your book, you have some crazy stories in there of things that you were involved with, but how much of FBI life is like what we see in the movies, the Hollywood version? And if it's not like that, what's it really like?
Yeah, well, most of what you see in the movies is kind of an aggregation of a lot of different lives occasionally. Like, it would depend upon the movie that you were looking at, whether it be for the FBI or whether it be as a hostage negotiator. Most of the hostage negotiation stuff's pretty inaccurate, pretty overblown. But the FBI is good stuff. I mean, you get I got to do some interesting things. I worked terrorism, I worked surveillance. I followed people around in New York City. We arrested bad guys. Didn't get any shootouts. Was prepared to, and came very close a number of times. But the FBI tends to be pretty organized, and we don't encourage shootouts, which means we want to outman and outgun the bad guys so that they see that and they give up peacefully. So arrested a lot of organized crime people, a lot of terrorists, literally, and had a great career. Traveled pretty much all over the world.
Yeah. So at what point did you say, I want to write this book? What was the original inspiration for it?
Well, yeah, and that's kind of a critical issue, especially for entrepreneurs. Like when I got out of the FBI, I went back to school, worked on a master's degree in a special program for older students at Harvard. It was called the mid-career program, and you could get in based on your resume. Those of us that don't test well, I'm not going to knock the lights out of any test to get into a master's program, but a bunch of us had good resumes, and at that School of Government, if you were in public service and you wanted to continue to support public service, you could apply. And so I got in with a bunch of talented people that I was really impressed to be around. And one guy in particular said, "You got to write a book. If you're gonna have a business, you got to write a book. It doesn't even have to be good. You just got to get a book out." And I thought, all right, so there's a certain amount of sense to that. But I want to make sure that it's a pretty good book. We, my team, principally myself, Brandon, who's the president of my company. Again, for entrepreneurs, you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go as a team. You have to have a team. And it's really been Brandon and I from the beginning as trusted coworkers. And he taught with me at Georgetown and at USC, even at Harvard. And we wanted to make sure we had a system end to end. We just didn't want to put a book out there. Now, it ain't a bad idea to put a book out. One security guy that I spoke to in DC when I was there before the book came out, he self-published a book and paid to put it in Hudson Bookseller. That's a phenomenal place to put your book. And he told me, he said, "Look, if I'd have known how much business I was going to get, this is the best marketing I ever did. Just getting it in a Hudson Bookseller, business people walked through. Guy picked it up in a train station, read it on the train, and hired him." So, there's a lot to just getting a book out, showing what your expertise is. We didn't quite want to pull that trigger. We waited a few years, felt like we had the system down end to end, taught and refined it. The way we taught it in the MBA program, I made my students apply it in their real life. A lot of negotiation courses, at Harvard, we did all simulated negotiations. And then we wrote about the simulations. And there's a lot of shortcomings to that. So I thought, well, I'm going to make them do it in real life and then write about it. So and the book is full of real life examples from my students in the different MBA programs doing phenomenal stuff on their jobs, whether or not they were government contractor or whether they were on Wall Street. So then when we had a lot of real life actual examples, we had the system. We went out, we found Tal Raz, who is a genius writer. I mean, read any business book. Now, he's a business writer. I wouldn't hire him to write a children's book, but as far as business books go, probably the best that ever was. And we got Tal on the. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Tell us a little bit more about that. What made you feel like I need to go hire somebody to help me write this book versus just writing it myself?
Yeah, great question. From hostage negotiation, I had learned, hostage negotiation looks easy, and it is. You got to study it. It's like any skill. You got to deep dive. So I'm like, I'm not a writer. I'm a teacher. I'm a talker. I fancy myself a thinker. Dan Sullivan, a strategic coach, said you're a simplifier. You see how to explain things clearly. And my former boss, Gary Nessner, one of the most entertaining people I've ever met in my life. He wrote his own book, Stalling for Time. Now, his book is good, and Gary is great. And his book, as entertaining as it is nowhere near as entertaining as he is in person. The first story in his book's about a place called Sperryville. And I've heard Gary tell the story of Sperryville in person, and he's had me on the edge of my seat every time. And I know how it ends. And he still has me on the edge of my seat when he tells the story. And when he wrote it, it was good, but nowhere near as good as he is in person. So I thought, all right, I got to get a great writer. And the cliche advice is go to the bookstore, find the book that you love, that you want to emulate, and hire that guy. And I had been blown away with the book Never Eat Alone, Keith Ferrazzi's book on networking that Tall wrote. Loved reading it, eminently readable. And I used to carry that Never Eat Alone around with me with the different, I fired 4 writers in total in a journey. And I'd hand them Never Eat Alone, and I'd say, write this book. This is brilliantly structured. It's digestible, it's readable. Everything about the structure is magnificent, which is true. Tall created the structure. I didn't realize how smart a researcher he was in addition, because he captures the author's voice. And finally, you know, when I couldn't find somebody that could emulate Tall's writing style, I thought, well, the answer here is obvious. I went straight to Tall and we made the deal.
Now, an established ghostwriter like that is not exactly affordable for many entrepreneurs out there. And maybe you can't share exactly what you paid, but I'm guessing that it was probably north of 6 figures to get Tall's assistance on this book.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs who might be looking to hire a ghostwriter, but they're not quite in that market to be able to hire somebody like Tall?
Yeah, that's a scary thing, because that's exactly right. Tall's fee was out of my range. Now, like, I could have paid his fee. He wanted a guarantee. We sat down, didn't have any money back then. Well, you know, I had savings, but the business wasn't built.
Okay.
And he said, look, you know, I'd love to do this as a percentage collaboration. You know, I think it's interesting as hell, but I got a wife, I got kids. Like, I'm getting X dollars for these books. That's what I'm getting. If I take you on straight percentage and that doesn't come through, I mean, she's going to kill me. I got a family. And we got the book deal, and then I went back and hired him because the book deal made it available. Now, he has since told me, you know, there's some brilliant writers out there that just do proposals. And if I had it to do over, I'd have hired, you know, a superstar just to do the proposal. Somebody who did business books, and I could have afforded that. It would scared me, but I could have afforded it. If you think of 2 different guys, one guy to get you your $500,000 deal, so that you can then turn around and get the guy that you want. And Tall has actually done that a couple of times. Tall would actually rather write the book. He wouldn't really want to do the proposal. And by accident, that's how we got him. I had somebody else had done the proposal, and we got a great deal so that we could afford Tall.
So
and
you
that's
did
the
have
advice
somebody
that I would give now.
So you did have somebody write your book proposal then?
I did. My original vision was that this guy was going to do both. And it didn't work out that way. It would have cost me exactly the same amount of money. And now, if I was struggling and starting out, I'd say, look, scrape together your dollars. The book deal is going to be worth it. If you get a business writer to do the proposal, get the deal, and then turn around and get the star. You know, if you're doing a business book, I'm here to tell you, you're not going to find anybody better than Tall Ross.
So you hired somebody to write the book proposal. You thought they would write the book too. With that book proposal, then, did you go straight to publishers, or did you find a literary agent who then helped you get the deal? How did the deal come about?
I'd already had the agent, Steve Ross. I've been to a number of agents, and several agents said, this book will never sell. There's no appetite for another negotiation book. The market's flooded. I mean, sometimes you wonder why people take meetings. Why would you take a meeting to just, you know, badmouth somebody's idea? And it happens. Like, it, you know, shot the TV show a few times. We're sitting with a network in New York. We spent a lot of money to be there, and we sit down with these bozos, and the guy starts to tell me what a lousy idea the TV show is. And I'm thinking, like, how do you make a living spending your time not doing things? And the agent, there are a couple of agents we talked to, like, nah, you know, this book will never sell. Nobody will be interested in it. And I'm thinking, like, time is money. Why are you wasting your time? So then I stumbled over Steve Ross. Steve had agented another book, business book by a guy named Joe Navarro, What Everybody Is Telling You. Joe's a profiler, wrote a phenomenal body language book. And that's how I ended up in Steve's office. And Steve said, look, I don't know how well it's going to do domestically. I don't know what kind of appetite there is. But internationally, they love anything that's got FBI on it. So I know I can sell the heck out of this internationally, which, by the way, he did. And, we're in 36 countries. So he agreed. He was the first guy that had any sort of positive remarks. We pulled together the book proposal. Now, he didn't expect it to be a big deal either. And the publishers went nuts. Like, he almost panicked. We had so many publishers coming after him. And I'm a keep my word guy. And he was in New York. I was in DC. He says, look, man, you got to come up. You got to spend 2 weeks in New York. There's so many publishers want this book. We got to make the rounds. We got to talk to everybody. And I said, Steve, I got obligations over the next 2 months. And I keep my word. I got 1 day. I think he had a heart attack. He's like, all right, well, we'll do an auction. You come up, and 1 day, I'm going to stack you meetings end to end. We're going to start at 7 o'clock in the morning. We'll go to 7 o'clock at night. You better get a good night's sleep the night before, because I'm going to work you hard while we talk to the publishers. And I'm like, cool. Because one of my core values is you will not outwork me. You may be smarter than me. You may have better friends than me. You may be more well-connected than me. You're not going to outwork me. And I'll prove it to you. So, Steve telling me this, I'm like, cool, I could do this. I'll outwork anybody on the planet. And, we met up with the publishers, and he cut the deal on the auction. He says, we got to strike while the iron is hot. We actually ran the auction just before Halloween on a Thursday and a Friday. If you're familiar with New York and the literary world, they're partying on Halloween. Halloween is probably the biggest party night of the year in the United States. I don't know about globally, but when I was a police officer, more people got locked up for drunk driving on Halloween than on New Year's Eve. I mean, Halloween is party time, especially in New York. And all these publishers like, we got a Halloween party. We want to dress up. We want to have the office party. And Steve was like, I don't care. This is the day the auction is. And it went really well. And we got the deal. And the book has done. The agents were wrong and the publishers were right. And there's a massive appetite for a good negotiation book.
So it's interesting how things change there. I mean, you had all these people telling you there may not be any appetite for this, or there is no appetite for this, but the publishers got it and they appreciated it and they thought it was going to be a big deal. Why do you think they got it, but the other people didn't?
That's a great question. I have no idea. Different mindset. I see the literary world and agents. It's another aspect of the entertainment business. And the number of people in the entertainment business that take meetings to prove to you that they're smarter than you by telling you that your idea is a stupid idea. I mean, I believe that human nature is a pretty universal thing, in the laws of human nature. I mean, we call them laws of negotiation gravity when we're teaching the black swan methods, stuff that's just utterly true, no matter what. I like to think that people in the entertainment world, and agents in particular, are not dumber than the rest of the planet for taking meetings constantly with the intention of shooting down an idea, or taking a meeting with the intention of not moving forward on the project. I've been stunned at the number of meetings that I've been in the entertainment world where they want to give you ideas, but they have no intention of doing business with you, which is an utter waste of time. I don't know how that mindset got started. People proven to themselves that they're smart by shooting down other people's ideas, but it's just at the point now where there's a lot of meetings I don't even take because we'll get a read in advance. That's going to be a waste of time, and we're like, no thanks, don't want to talk. And the agents are in that mindset. I mean, many agents are in that mindset.
So ultimately, you went with HarperCollins Business to
Right.
publish. And there are different factors that go into choosing a publisher to work with when you're in this situation where they're bidding for your project. Obviously, money's part of that. But what were some of the other things that influenced your decision to choose Harper?
Well, it was more what influenced their decision to outbid everybody else, because we'd met with their reps, Hollis Heimbach, and hit it off. I was really impressed with her when we met. And on the strength of that meeting, I turned around when the bidding got started and asked Steve that exact question that you're posing to me. How do we decide? And he said, what you're going to find out is who puts in the most money is going to be the most committed. And then Steve and both Tall on a follow-on kind of on the side, and especially Tall, took me off to the side and said, look, you got to hustle this book. Do not rely on anybody else. Don't rely on a publisher. Don't rely on the agent. He said, you need to get out there and put the hammer down for at least a year, maybe 2. And I remember hearing that the Chicken Soup for the Soul guys, they made it a point on their first book to talk to somebody every day. It didn't, I don't know, maybe they were willing to talk to a collection of homeless people, but they were going to talk to somebody every day. So what I'd heard about those guys, and then also the advice from Tall, again, this is up my alley. You want me to work hard on this? You got it. 2 years, I'll give you 10. And to this day, we have never stopped hustling on the book. And I'm not sure that I talk to somebody every day, but I would bet that I do something, podcast, talk to somebody just darn close to an average of 1 a day. We have never let up. And there've been a couple of critical turning points also on that journey that made a big difference. But it was like, look, don't rely on anybody else. You make sure you lead the charge.
Quick break here. Are you an entrepreneur? Do you want to write a book that will help you grow your business? Visit publishedauthor.com, where we have programs to fit every budget, programs that will help you write and publish your book in as little as 90 days, starting at just $39 per month. Or, if you're too busy to write your book, we'll interview you and then write and publish your book for you. Don't let the valuable knowledge and experience you have go to waste. Head on over to publishedauthor.com to get the help you need to become a published author. You've already waited long enough. Do it today. Now, back to the show. So now when you got the book deal, the book wasn't written yet, right? You had the proposal, you had the general idea. How much of it was fleshed out or structured or outlined?
We almost threw out the entire structure previously. And that was a cool thing about Tall, because, we've done a number of other projects. In a previous project, Tall is an artist. And he'd already been proven to write business books. So, Brandon and I sit down with Tall for 36 hours. He comes down to DC, stays at Brandon's house, and he brings 2 tape recorders, and he just downloads everything out of both our brains that he can for pretty much, 36 solid hours. He doesn't let up. And then he goes home. And we don't hear from him again, but we got a massive amount of material that we've dumped on him. We must have given him videos of 50 classes that we taught. Plus, he did a massive amount of research. I could tell when he'd read a negotiation book because he'd ask questions, for example, on stuff from Jim Camp. He'd start asking me stuff with start with no. And like, I know this stuff backwards and forwards. I'm like, cool, you're reading the right books. And then he delivered the middle of the book. I'm like, we get hit. The first chapters I get to review are like 5, 6, and 7 of a 10-chapter book. And I'm thinking like, okay, I don't know how you're starting in the middle. And then he wrote the next to the last. He wrote the last chapter next to last. And he wrote the first chapter last. And that was his process. But he also knew, like, the first chapter sells the book. right at last. It's just so obvious, but I haven't worked with anybody since that's followed that. I mean, we've got a real estate book in progress now that Tall is not involved in. And we've gone through several writers there. And every single one of them wants to outline the 10 chapters and then wants to write the 10 chapters in order, which is the first chapter first. But Tall is such an artist that, it came through. And we just sat back and waited. Like after the interview, I waited 3 months. And then suddenly I get an email and there's this work of art took some editing on my part. I own every word in that book. And which is another thing he told me. He said, like, you can't just sit back and take what I write. You're going to have to own and know every word in this book and be accountable for it. And so, but minimal editing on my part because he got it.
Mm-hmm. So this 3-month period, was this after the book deal then that he started working on that, right?
Yeah, we got the book deal. About 2 or 3 weeks later, we had a conference call, the publisher, Tall, me, Brandon, Steve. It was kind of interesting because at that point in time, the publisher didn't know that my son was involved. It's my name on a contract. And it was pretty cool because we all signed in on the phone and in different locations. I go, Chris Voss, I'm on, Tall Roz, I'm on, Brandon Voss, I'm on. And Hollis gets on the phone and she says, just so I know, what's Brandon Voss doing on the phone? And I go dead silent because I want to hear what Tall is going to say. And Tall goes, having Brandon around is having another Chris involved. And Hollis is like, cool. And then we're off to the races. So Hall comes, Hollis wants to know that we're going to hit our time marks. She hasn't spoken to Tall yet. She knows of him because the dude's reputation in the publishing world is huge. Publishers love it when Tall Roz is involved because everything he touches is a bestseller. And, you're going to make the time frame. How do you feel about this? And Tall's like, yeah, he wanted a year. We gave him 10 months. And he says, yeah, but I can hit these marks. And we did the interview. He delivered, on schedule, the middle part of the book. When he delivered the middle part of the book, we're about a third of the way into it. So I'm optimistic that this is going to happen. It's tight. It's the best writing I've seen. He's a 4th writer. And when I'm seeing his work product, it's just better than anything anybody else has delivered. Minimal revisions. Other guys had massive revisions. And so then I'm like, okay, well, your work product is this good. I don't care if you're writing it backwards and upside down. It's this good. And so then, we got a couple more chapters and then finally we got the tail end and we finished well ahead of schedule.
Okay. So total time from the time you got the deal until the manuscript was submitted to the publisher, about how much time was that?
It's about 10 months.
Okay. So you did hit that target. So then how much longer after you submitted it to the publisher until it actually was in your hands as a physical book?
Yeah. The publisher told us, they said they want, we want to know that we have a finished product 6 months before launch. So we're not going to guarantee you a launch date until we not only do we have the product, but it's been edited. Everybody's been through the editing process. I mean, we're ready to go to print. And that may have taken another month because, they did their own run through. They had a couple questions. The book, because I was a retired FBI agent, had to pass through the FBI's pre-publication review, which I expected that to be painful, and it was not. The turnaround time was great. The guy at the bureau that I worked with was phenomenal. They had a couple of minor glitches, stuff that I had to fix, and tiny. I expected, but I had done my homework in advance. So I'd anticipated and already headed off all the problems. So that went smooth. And it was probably from the time we gave them the manuscript to the time that they were ready to pull the trigger to begin the printing process was probably about a month, I would guess. And then at that point in time, it's just them energizing their distribution network. And they said, we need 6 months for this. Because we can't energize the distribution network if we can't guarantee a product to put in their hand on a certain date. Then we were making a call on a target date. They were leaning in the direction of springtime, late spring, and we ended up launching in May.
All right. So the book launches in May. What were your expectations for what would happen immediately after the book went live or was released, and how did that match up with reality?
Yeah, I don't know that I had a lot of expectations. We hired a traditional publicist, and I ended up being, they were okay. They did a couple of good things. Everybody that I know that's doing well in books, they really are standing up their own network as much as they possibly can. The publicists, I was a complete unknown at that point in time, and they did a nice job getting some placement in some magazines, and that was helpful. We were trying to blow out the pre-orders so that on day of launch, ideally we could hit some kind of bestseller list. The biggest boost overall has been Amazon. Amazon is just a phenomenal partner. They know that the harder they hustle for you, the more money everybody makes. If you were to criticize Amazon, I don't know what you would criticize them for, but I mean, like, they will do whatever they can on the day your book launches to try to categorize you number one as something. Like, this book over here, Ego, Authority, Failure, which Derek Gaunt, we sponsored Derek. Derek's on my team. Hostage negotiator, wrote a leadership book based on our same principles. Now we did total self-published route with Derek. He wrote it. We went through a completely other process. And the other process with him, his process, they put him on Amazon, and Amazon found a way to put him in a category as a bestseller in this category on day one. So Amazon is a phenomenal partner. The traditional publicist got us in a couple of magazines that was somewhat helpful. They got us on TV day of launch on Fox. That ended up being massive. The only time that you can really get on TV for your book is the day it launches, and any decent publicist will pull that off for you. Nearly every publicist wants to become independent. They want a 6-month deal to hustle on your behalf. What we found almost all of them do is they're going to knock themselves out for you the first month, and then they're going to coast for the rest of the time. And having learned that the hard way, we went back and I engaged another publicist, and I said, I'm going to pay you for a month. And they said, well, we want 6 months. And I'm like, no. And, one of our negotiation techniques is a no-oriented question. Instead of yes, would you like to do this? Are you against doing this? And I said to them, so you're telling me that you're against allowing me to hire you for a month because I'm not going to hire you for 6. You refuse to allow me to hire you for a month. And they go, no, we're not against that. We're not going to refuse that. And so we got the deal for a month. And this explicitly to get me into the media and TV. And it was hard for them because it wasn't launch. And thank God I only hired them for a month, because it's harder for them if it's not your opening day. How do they interest? Every media outlet wants you on opening day. If they can't tie you clearly into a story at any other time, they really don't want you because it's not interesting to them. And this publicist really struggled with that. We found out for them, for TV and media appearances, thank God I didn't hire these guys for 6 months, because they had trouble delivering for the first month, and they were working their tail off.
So then what was the reception like? I mean, it's become a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's been on other bestseller lists, but did that happen immediately? Did it grow over time? What was the path to that bestseller status?
Yeah, hiring the right publicist to put us on podcasts. So opening day, it blasted out really good because the two different Fox appearances, one on Fox News, one on Fox Business. Bang! I mean, it went through the roof. We made top 10 Amazon, which is kind of arguably top 10 in the world, all categories, because Amazon is the biggest marketplace. And then it just started falling off a cliff after that. It did not sustain. Like Tall said, ideally you're going to be in the top 100 for the first month, and we fell out of the top 100 like within a week. Like, oh God, what do we got to do? And so then I was taking any podcast I could get, and we were kind of sustaining it because the book hadn't been out that long, and at that point in time it hadn't made any bestseller lists. Top 10 on Amazon one day is not good enough to make any bestseller list. But we continue to scrap and hustle and talk to anybody, homeless people, I didn't care, people in the airport, I didn't care, wherever we could. I mean, doing everything possible. Every bookstore I went by, I went in and signed copies. I'd sign 2 copies, sign everything I could get my hands on. And so the first month we were lucky enough to get into as some categories a national bestseller. And I don't even remember, what book list it was. It wasn't Wall Street Journal, wasn't New York Times by any means, but it was a national bestseller. So, it might have been Jack and Jill children's books. I didn't know what it was. It didn't matter, but it was legitimately a category where we could put that out there. So now we got a little interest. But then the real key point was I went to Ryan Holiday and his company Brass Check. Ryan has written a whole bunch of books, and he also has not only written books, but he also has a book promotion company and a book publishing company. And I'd heard of Ryan. I didn't know him personally at the time. This ended up being the best money I ever spent. Ryan says, all right, so probably what you really need is you need good placement on a high level podcast. You're going to find that people have a tendency to put you on their podcast if somebody else in their categories already had you on as an interview. So I got some connections. I can put you at a good level, and he gets me on Lewis Howes. Lewis Howes, a great guy and a talented interviewer. And it's really invisible because you got to watch several of Lewis's interviews to really understand how good he is at talking to people and bringing out the best in people. And he does the interview. He's an interesting, decent human being. Plus he does it with video. And then he's smart enough, he hustles the heck out of it himself because it's in his interest. I nailed the Lewis Howes podcast, and bang, now we're hitting podcasts that are kind of at the same tier as Lewis Howes, and then the book sales are picking up. Now the thing that was cool about Ryan was he said, this is what I'm going to charge you, and you're going to hire me for a month. So Ryan did not want to become a dependent. He wanted to work for a month. He knew that if he could provide value, he could do it in a month. And that was all he needed to do. Get us launched into the stratosphere and not continue as a dependent. Unlike all the other podcast or publicists who want to be a dependent for at least 6 months so that they could coast. I've found this to be a universal issue. Anybody that wants to go on a retainer for 6 months or more, they want to coast. They want to knock themselves out for a month, and then they want to chill for 5. And Ryan didn't want that. Not so much so that when I came back to Ryan a year later, because I'm thinking like, all right, so a year ago, Ryan gave us a phenomenal boost. What can he do now? And I went back to Ryan and I said that same thing. I said, look, man, I mean, what you did, the shot in the arm you gave us a year ago was phenomenal. Let's do it again. And Ryan said, no, I did my thing for you. You could hire me for a month. I could charge you the amount of money again for a month, and it wouldn't do you any good. I already did my thing. I'm not going to take your money. And I was like, wow, like you are so rare. You are only going to take money if you can actually help somebody. And to this day, I mean, you know, we've crossed paths occasionally. We've spoken at a couple conferences. I got a couple of mutual friends that he has much more interaction with my mutual friends. But I got so much regard for this guy because he delivers value or he doesn't work for you.
That's great. So you got on these podcasts and then the book sales started climbing. How long did it take until you got onto the Wall Street Journal bestseller list? Because that's a serious achievement to get on that list.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. We didn't get on that list until after the first year. I mean, you know, sometimes you just got to wait for the stars to line up, and you know, and every now and then, in really odd ways, the stars are going to line up. And so we just continued to hustle. The book sales were solid. We started, you know, I heard little other hints here and there from people about how to hustle the book. You know, there's a phrase, never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with. Or, you know, similar to that, you know, never take directions from somebody who hasn't been where you're going. Another friend of mine, Eric Barker, wrote a book called Barking Up the Wrong Tree, which I highly recommend. It's about actual success in life. Eric's a regular guy. He doesn't care what it takes to be successful, but he's going to do the research on what it takes to be successful, and he's going to tell you. That's what the book is about. He's got a blog that I read all the time by the same name, Barking Up the Wrong Tree. You know, I'm sitting with Eric in LA one time, and he says, look, this is what I do on a regular basis on the postings that I do. This is how I structure my blog so that which affects my book sales. Like one thing Eric said that was critical to me. He says, like, first of all, people are going to criticize you, and for every troll, every critic, you got at least 10 fans. So take every critic as a sign of success. And if you're not getting criticized, you're not working hard enough. You're not doing well. You should be scared if you're not getting criticized. He says, I'll give you a case in point. In my blog, the very first thing in each one of my blogs is a link to buy my book. He says, I've gotten a massive amount of criticism from the trolls for putting that first. Oh, why are you putting it here? You're interfering with me reading your blog. You know, it's disruptive, you know, just critical stuff. He says, every time that I pull that out of that position, my book sales drop. And when I leave it in that position, which people complain about, my book sales are always higher. And I'm like, wow, cool. You know, don't be gun shy of the trolls. If you're being criticized, there's a pretty good chance it's an indicator you're on the right track. You want to live a life where there's not where nobody's throwing rocks at you. You are not living in a real world, especially in today's social media, where the media and the social media specialize in finding people to throw rocks at you to try to intimidate you out of doing what is in your best interest. And Eric was one of the first people that pointed that out to me. And I pointed it out to a number of entrepreneurs. You know, I've spoken to people. Carolyn Rim is a phenomenal motivational speaker out of Philadelphia. She was getting some vicious criticism on Facebook once. And I emailed her and I said, thank God you're getting criticized. You know, for every critic, you get 10 people that love you. If you haven't got being criticized, is a sign of success. And she was kind of like, because she was taking it personally. I mean, getting some vicious personal criticism. People trying to tear her down, and we're not on her side anyway. But you can listen to these trolls, and it distracts you from the fact that you're actually doing the right thing.
So fast forward to today, it's been about 5 years since the book came out. How have sales gone over that 5-year period? Have there been ups and downs? Has it consistently sold more? Has it turned into one of those perennial sellers like Ryan Holiday talks about?
Well, it's a perennial because, you know, we're relentless. The perennial nature is how relentlessly we are. Now, there've been a couple of ups and downs. It spiked into the top 10 on Amazon 2 separate times after the opening. And I like one I tried to duplicate, and both were complete accidents. Like I get an opportunity to speak at the Global Leadership Summit in Chicago, which is affiliated with a church. It's supported by a church. It's a non-denominational and spiritual conference. And my daughter-in-law, Maya, cuts the deal. And I got no idea what I'm stepping into at the time. It's in an auditorium of 7,000 people, and it's simulcast to 100,000 people. And then they repackage the simulcast, they put it all over the world. I got no idea I'm walking into a venue this big. And, we've gone back and forth with them. They've been very supportive. They were wonderful. And they were dealing with a troll of their own at the time. And when I got the gig, a friend of mine, Sheila Heen, wrote a great book called Difficult Conversations. She said, all right, so I recommend that you do this and know that they have a critic out there who has criticized them over some stuff that may have been legitimate. They made their adjustments and tried to make peace with this person because they fixed, they corrected all their sins, if you will. And this person, this troll, has so defined themselves as being a critic, they're unwilling to stop criticizing. So, there's nothing wrong with these people. They're good people, and you're going to take some heat. And because this person has so defined themselves as being a critic, they can't be a decent person. So I'm like, cool. I'm willing to take heat with the right people, especially if they've made whatever adjustments they need to make. So I walk in, and these are phenomenal people. This conference is phenomenal, and I'm looking at book sales that day, and the numbers climbing, and I'm like, what's going on here? So that was a delight, and it spiked one other time when I did a Reddit Ask Me Anything, because the stars happen to line up. I did a Reddit subsequently and didn't get the same results. So the bottom line is like keep hustling, keep doing the right thing. Don't get deterred if you try something and it has no impact. Because I did a Reddit once and it spiked into the top 10, and I did it again a year later and there was no impact. And because we've refused to stop hustling, then it has remained. It's remained steadily. I check the numbers every day, and I check our where we are in relationship to other books, because I'm trying to get a feel for where we are. And we're hovering in about the 200, rank number 200 these days. It's gotten as low as 3,000, but we're staying in a ballpark of about 200 to 500 because we just don't give up.
That's phenomenal. Now, the $20 million question here is, how has this helped your business to grow? What impact has it had on Black Swan Group?
No better marketing tool. None. No better marketing tool. And way back to the security guy that I was talking about that self-published a book and put it in Hudson Books. He said, this is the best marketing money I have ever spent, ever. And, I got another guy that he does marketing on a much smaller scale in LA. And he put out a self-published book. And it's you think as a business owner, if you're a consultant with expertise, that like, look, I'm the same dude before this book, but your clients, they want to see that you got a book. I mean, it's the best business card there is. Business cards are useless. Hand somebody your book. I mean, there's nothing, as a consultant, there's nothing that touches it. Tall has written books with CEOs, and they dumped a lot of money into hiring Tall to write the book, and it has put those CEOs on the map in ways that nothing else would have. So the guys way back when before I would write a book, who told me, get a book out, no matter what you do, get a book out, they were right. It's also an indicator. A book project is a serious project end to end. if you can get a book out, you've proven that you have an amount of expertise in and around the area that you're trying to get hired for. So there's no substitute for it.
You mentioned that Lewis Howes was a great interviewer. Is there any one thing that he did that was standout? I'd love to learn if there's some tip that I can apply from your interview with him. I'd love to know if there's something that he did that I could implement that would improve what I'm doing here.
Well, I don't know if there would necessarily be an improvement for you, but what Lewis does real good is he does like minimal paraphrasing, which gently steers the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And effectively, it's a little bit of an interrupt. But most people, when they get interrupted, they're used to, the person is interrupting them is to take over the conversation and show how smart they are. Like, and an example that really stood out to me was Andrew Huberman is a neuroscientist out of Stanford, has his own podcast that I listen to whenever I get the chance, almost daily. And plus, I've caught Andrew's interviews in other places.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't do this, but I heard him being interviewed by another guy, and the guy that was interviewing him wanted to show that he was as smart as Andrew. Or Tim Ferriss definitely wants to show off how much he knows. And use big words, and Ferriss likes to talk as if he had a PhD himself, and really talk about complicated, which Huberman got a kick out of, but it made the interview that much harder to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
Now I listened to him on Lewis, and I'm like, you're 10 times better here than you are on your own podcast. What the Lewis doing that makes such a difference? And I focused really in because I hadn't even seen it. Lewis is constantly paraphrasing. Lewis is not really there to show you how smart he is or to prove that he's done the research. He doesn't prove that at all. He listens intently. He's got a good instinct for the really interesting stuff. And since he frequently jumps in with the paraphrases, you don't get a 20-minute answer out of Andrew Huberman that you get out of him on his podcast, or Andrew will run down a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
Or he'll throw every cautionary thing out there. He says, just because I do this doesn't mean you should do this. You should talk to your doctor. And I'm a researcher. I profess. I'm not a doctor. Andrew's real careful about nobody claiming that they sued him because they followed his advice.
So lots of filler, lots of tangents.
Yeah, which is important on his own podcast, but that's ultimately that ain't that interesting. It's distracting in an interview.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis doesn't allow that stuff because he's constantly gently jumping in there and guiding the interview. And I thought, wow, I've been interviewed by Lewis twice and I haven't seen him do this. I hadn't noticed that he did this.
Yeah, no, that's great.
But those bad habits, man, I did not get the sense that you were busy trying to prove here how smart you are, how experienced you are. I enjoyed this interview. I was actually kind of surprised at the direction and how you got me talking about everything. I'm really kind of surprised about how you got me talking about everything.
So one last question I've been wanting to ask was, your book really makes good use of stories, the way that you weave your stories into the practical content. Was that a discussion that you had with Tal? Was that an idea Tal had, or how did it happen that way that you decided to weave your stories into the book in the way that it happened?
Tal really picked the stories. I mean, we exposed Tal to a massive amount of information, and we let him choose. Now, I'd seen previously a great way to illustrate a point, and I learned a lot of it. Also, I took some speaker training from the National Speakers Association, and to be a keynote speaker. And the training that they gave me actually is how we created the chapter that sold the book. And the illustration was on a single given point. To get people to get it, you needed to illustrate it 3 ways. You needed 2 or 3 stories. So our original design was, for example, the effectiveness of summarizing somebody's perspective and getting it "that's right" out of the person, which is a game-changing moment. I mean, just absolute game-changing moment. So we tell a hostage negotiation story where it changed everything, getting a terrorist to say that's right. Then a business negotiation story where it's not me, but it's one of my students from Georgetown or USC, where they get a that's right, and the other side gives them the deal as soon as they say that's right. And then a personal story where I get a that's right out of my son Brandon, and it changes his behavior. So we knew that basic structure required stories, and probably several stories to illustrate the same point. So I already knew I had that, and that basically is the structure of the book, where we illustrate everything. And then Paul, being both the technical genius and the artist, then we relied upon Paul to pick the best stories. There were a number of them that I recommended. You know, we had them organized. I had over 200 stories. We narrowed it down to 30 business school student stories in specific categories. I categorized them in advance. And then Paul, as the artist, picked out the most compelling ones.
Well, Chris Voss, thank you so much for being with us here today. Once again, Chris Voss, author of the best-selling book, Never Split the Difference. If people want to reach out and connect with you, find more about you and the Black Swan Group, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, the best way to learn the Black Swan method, for us to help you, for the Black Swan Group to meet you where you are, is to subscribe to our newsletter, which is complimentary, but better than that, it's actionable. An email will come to your email Tuesday morning. Get Monday behind you. Get ready to get down to business on Tuesday. Wherever you are in the world, you get it Tuesday morning early. Send a text message, text to sign up function, which only works in the United States. But the number is 33777. The number you're texting to is 33777. To learn the Black Swan method, send the message Black Swan method. 3 words, spaces between each word, to that number. You get an email back asking, a text back asking for your email. The newsletter takes you to the website. It's a gateway to everything. Website happens to be blackswanltd.com. Newsletter is a gateway to everything we have. We got a lot of free material so you can get your feet under you to get you ready to go to the more advanced levels with us. We'll meet you where you are.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chris, for being with us here on the show today.
That was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to spread the word, please give us a 5-star rating review and tell your friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you listen to podcasts. And if you're an entrepreneur interested in writing and publishing a nonfiction book to grow your business and make an impact, visit publishedauthor.com for show notes for this podcast and other free resources.